I watched through the one-way glass as my parents shifted uncomfortably in the leather chairs of the bank's executive conference room. Time had changed them. Father's hair now completely silver, mother's perfect posture slightly stooped. But their air of entitled superiority remained intact even as they prepared to beg for financial salvation. The Chen family's request for a $50 million emergency loan. Thomas, my CFO, reviewed the file in front of me. Their real estate empire is on the verge of collapse. Overextended, overleveraged, and severely impacted by the market downturn. I nodded, studying my parents' faces. They hadn't seen me in 20 years, not since the night they'd thrown me out for choosing love over their arranged marriage plans. My name is Victoria Chen, and 2 decades ago, I was the perfect daughter of one of San Francisco's wealthiest families. Then I fell in love with James Walker, a brilliant software engineer from a working-class background. My parents' response had been swift and absolute: marry their choice, wealthy real estate heir Andrew Kim, or be cut off completely. I chose James. They don't know you own Meridian Bank? Thomas asked quietly. No, I replied, remembering the day I'd walked away from my family's wealth and privilege. They probably assume I'm living in some middle-class suburb, married to my poor husband. The irony wasn't lost on me. James's software innovations had made us billionaires within 10 years of our marriage, while my parents continued building their real estate empire the old way, through connections, leverage, and family money. We quietly revolutionized financial technology. 5 years ago, we'd bought Meridian Bank as part of our expansion into financial services. Now, watching my parents await their fate in that conference room, I thought about all they'd missed. Our wedding, celebrated with friends who loved us for who we were, not what we owned. The birth of our children, now teenagers who'd never met their grandparents. Every success, every milestone, every moment of the life they deemed beneath them. Their financials are worse than they're admitting, Thomas continued, flipping through reports. Without this loan, they'll default on multiple properties within months. The Chen empire will collapse. I studied the papers in front of me. The numbers told a clear story. My parents had overextended, betting big on luxury developments just before the market turned. Their old methods of doing business, relying on personal relationships and social connections, hadn't adapted to changing times. Mrs. Walker. Thomas's voice pulled me from my thoughts. How would you like to proceed? Before I could answer, the conference room door opened and Robert Nash, our senior loan officer, entered to meet with my parents. I turned up the room's audio. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, Robert began formally. I've reviewed your loan application. Surely you know our reputation, my father interrupted, his voice carrying that familiar note of aristocratic assumption. The Chen family has been a pillar of San Francisco society for generations. Yes, sir, Robert replied smoothly. However, in today's market, reputation alone isn't sufficient security for a loan of this magnitude. My mother's back stiffened. We have collateral. Properties, assets, all heavily leveraged, Robert countered. Your debt-to-equity ratio is concerning and your recent projects have significantly underperformed projections. This is merely a temporary setback, my father insisted. The market will turn. When? Robert asked simply. Your nearest loan payment is due in 6 weeks. Without this financing, you'll default on at least 3 major properties. The silence that followed was heavy. I watched my parents exchange glances, decades of certainty in their own superiority crumbling in real time. Perhaps, Robert continued carefully, you have other resources, family members who could assist. My mother's face tightened. Our only daughter is no longer part of the family. Ah, yes. Robert consulted his notes with practiced casualness. Victoria Chen, now Victoria Walker. Quite successful in technology and banking, I believe. Her company's market cap recently exceeded $20 billion. I had to admire Robert's technique as he let that information sink in. My parents' expressions shifted from dismissal to shock as they processed the reality of their disowned daughter's wealth. Victoria, my father's voice cracked slightly. That's impossible. She married that engineer. James Walker, Robert supplied, the founder of Walker Tech. Their financial software revolutionized banking infrastructure. Surely you've heard of them. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. We haven't had contact. For 20 years, Robert finished. since you disowned her for marrying beneath her social class. Though given current circumstances, one might question whose choice proved more financially astute. I almost smiled at the subtle dig. Robert was playing his role perfectly, letting my parents face the full impact of their past decisions. The loan, my father tried to redirect, his voice less certain now. Surely our assets are insufficient, Robert stated flatly. Without additional security or a guarantor, I cannot recommend approval. The weight of those words settled over the room. 20 years of certainty in their own superiority, their own rightness, crashing down in a single meeting. What? My mother's voice was barely audible. What are our options? Robert closed his folder deliberately. You could approach your daughter. Her resources could easily secure this loan. Though given your history, no, my father's pride surfaced briefly. We cannot. Cannot what? Robert's voice sharpened slightly. Cannot admit you were wrong? Cannot acknowledge that the daughter you rejected for marrying beneath her station has achieved more wealth and success than you imagined possible? My parents sat in stunned silence. In their world, bankers didn't speak to them this way. But their world was crumbling, and with it, all the old certainties. I'll leave you to consider your options, Robert stood. Though I should mention, you're not the only one seeking financing for distressed properties in this market. These opportunities don't last long. After he left, I watched my parents sit in silence, 2 decades of choices and consequences hanging heavy between them. Victoria, my mother finally whispered. All this time. We should go, my father stood abruptly. There must be other banks, other options. There aren't, I said softly to the one-way glass. I've made sure of that. Thomas looked at me questioningly. Your instructions? I thought about the night I'd left, carrying a single suitcase, walking away from wealth and privilege toward an uncertain future with the man I loved. I thought about James's quiet confidence as we built something together, something real. And I thought about our children, raised to value character over class, innovation over inheritance. Let them stew for a few days, I decided. Let them face the reality of their situation. Then have Robert call them back for another meeting. And if they reach out to you directly? I smiled, remembering all the ignored letters over the years, the attempts to maintain their control through silence and rejection. They won't, I said certainly. Their pride won't let them. At least, not yet. As I watched them gather their things, my mother's hands shaking slightly as she picked up her designer handbag, my father's shoulders bent under the weight of impending failure, I felt no satisfaction, only a quiet certainty that sometimes life has a way of bringing things full circle. They walked out of the conference room, stepping into their waiting car, less luxurious than in years past, I noted, likely heading back to their mansion to regroup, to plan, to avoid facing the inevitable. But I knew what they did. Their options had already run out. Every major bank in the city was either owned by us or partnered with us. Every potential investor had been quietly warned away. The empire they built on social status and old money was about to collapse, leaving them with only one possible salvation: the daughter they'd rejected for daring to choose her own path. Thomas gathered the papers, pausing at the door. The next meeting? 3 days, I decided. Let's see how they handle the wait. As I stood to leave, I caught my reflection in the glass. Successful, confident, self-made. Everything they'd feared I'd never be without their guidance and control. Oh, and Thomas, I added, make sure Robert mentions that Meridian Bank recently came under new ownership. Let them start wondering exactly who they're dealing with. 3 days stretched into 5 as my parents explored every possible alternative to facing their situation. Through our extensive network, I tracked their increasingly desperate attempts to secure financing elsewhere. Each inquiry met with polite but firm rejections. They've started selling assets, Thomas reported, setting a folder on my desk. Their vacation home in Aspen, 3 luxury cars, your mother's jewelry collection. I picked up the folder, studying recent photos of my childhood home. The perfectly manicured gardens looked slightly overgrown now, the grand facade showing signs of deferred maintenance. And the company? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Share price is falling. Contractors are demanding upfront payments. 3 major projects are at risk of complete shutdown. The Chen family empire, built over 3 generations, was crumbling in real time. And still my parents resisted the obvious solution. Then came the call we'd been waiting for. They've requested another meeting, Robert announced. but with one condition. They want to meet the bank's owner. I closed my eyes briefly, 20 years of memories washing over me. Set it up. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. That evening, I told James about the meeting. He listened quietly as he always did, his brilliant engineer's mind processing the implications. Are you sure about this? He asked finally. We could buy their properties through intermediaries, save their company without revealing yourself. I shook my head. No, they need to understand exactly how wrong they were. About you, about me, about everything they thought they knew about worth and value. He pulled me close, and I breathed in the familiar scent of the man they deemed unworthy of their daughter. Whatever you decide, he said softly, I'm with you, just like always. The next morning, I dressed carefully, not in the designer labels my mother had insisted were essential to our social status, but in a perfectly tailored suit that spoke of confidence rather than wealth, success on my own terms. I'd arrived early, watching through the one-way glass as my parents were escorted into the conference room. They looked tired, the strain of impending financial ruin evident in their postures. Mrs. Walker. Thomas appeared at my side. They're ready. I took a deep breath. Let's finish this. The moment I walked into the conference room, time seemed to stop. My mother's hand flew to her throat, her face draining of color. My father half rose from his chair, sinking back as recognition hit him fully. Victoria, my mother whispered. Hello, mother. Father. I took my seat at the head of the table, noting how their eyes tracked my every movement. I believe you wanted to meet the owner of Meridian Bank. The silence that followed was deafening. 20 years of rejection, of pretending I didn't exist, shattered by the reality of their current situation. You, my father's voice cracked. You own the bank. Among other things, I kept my tone professional. Walker Tech, my husband's company, you remember James, the unsuitable engineer, has grown significantly since you last saw us. All this time, my mother's perfectly maintained facade cracked slightly. You've been successful? Yes, I opened their loan application. Unlike Chen Developments, which appears to be on the verge of collapse, my father's pride made one last attempt. We don't need. Yes, you do, I cut him off. You need $50 million immediately to avoid default. Another $100 million within 6 months to stabilize your projects. Without it, 3 generations of the Chen family legacy disappears. They sat in stunned silence as I laid out their situation with brutal precision. How? My mother's voice trembled. How did you build all this? I gestured to our surroundings. Without your connections, your social circle, your arranged marriages, by understanding that true worth isn't about who you know or where you come from. It's about innovation, adaptation, seeing the future instead of clinging to the past. Victoria, my father leaned forward. Whatever happened, we're still family. Are we? I met his gaze steadily. 20 years ago, family meant controlling who I could love. It meant choosing status over happiness. It meant turning your back on your only daughter because she saw value in something beyond your narrow definition of worth. We were trying to protect you, my mother whispered. No, I corrected quietly. You were trying to control me. There's a difference. I pulled out another folder, photos of my life they'd missed. My wedding to James, the birth of our children, holidays, celebrations, moments of joy shared with people who loved us for who we were, not what we owned. Your grandchildren, I said, watching their faces as they stared at images of teenagers they'd never met. Emma's starting college next year, MIT, early admission. Michael's already developing his own software. They've never known their grandparents, never understood why their mother's family chose pride over love. Tears rolled down my mother's face as she touched the photos. My father's hands trembled slightly. The loan application, I continued professionally. I'll be direct, no other bank will help you. We made sure of that. Your only option is Meridian Bank, is me. What? My father swallowed hard. What are your terms? I placed a document on the table. Full disclosure of all assets and liabilities. Complete restructuring of management. You'll step down. Professional executives will be appointed. And, I pause, letting the moment stretch. And, my mother prompted. And you'll both attend Sunday dinner at my house. Every week, you'll get to know your grandchildren, not as heirs to a fortune, but as the remarkable people they are. You'll see the life you rejected, understand the happiness you dismissed as beneath you. They stared at me, decades of pride warring with desperation. If we refuse? My father asked quietly. Then Chen Developments fails. Your empire collapses, and you spend your retirement wondering if your social status was worth the family you lost. The silence that followed was heavy with 20 years of choices and consequences. When? My mother's voice wavered. When is dinner? Sunday at 6. I stood gathering my papers. Don't be late. Emma's making her grandmother's dumplings. The ones you taught me before status became more important than family. As I walked to the door, my father called out, Victoria, we were wrong. I turned back, seeing for the first time not the powerful parents who'd shaped my childhood, but two elderly people facing the consequences of their choices. Yes, I said softly. You were. The question is, are you ready to make it right? The following Sunday, at exactly 6 o'clock, a car pulled up to our house. Not their usual luxury vehicle, but a modest sedan. I watched through the window as my parents approached the door, clutching a bottle of wine and looking more uncertain than I'd ever seen them. Emma opened the door, the granddaughter they'd never met welcoming them with her father's warm smile and her mother's strength. You must be my grandparents, she said simply. Come in. Dinner's almost ready. As they stepped into the home I'd built with the man they'd rejected, I saw them take in the success their narrow vision hadn't been able to imagine, not in designer labels or imported furniture, but in the patents framed on the walls, the prototypes of James's innovations, the awards for contributions to technology and finance. Welcome, James stepped forward, the unsuitable engineer now a respected innovator. We've been waiting a long time for this. And as we sat down to dinner, 3 generations at one table for the first time, I watched my parents begin to understand what they'd really lost 20 years ago. Not status or social position, but the chance to be part of something genuine, something built on love and innovation rather than privilege and pride. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. That would take time, effort, and genuine change on their part. But it was a beginning. A chance to rebuild not just their company, but something far more valuable. A family connection based on who we were, not what we owned. The Chen Empire might have crumbled, but from its ruins, something more authentic could grow. If they were willing to learn, to change, to see value beyond their old definitions of worth. As Emma served her dumplings, perfect replicas of her grandmother's recipe, learned from my memories rather than direct teaching, I saw tears in my mother's eyes. Perhaps she was finally understanding that true legacy isn't about money or status. It's about the connections we build, the love we share, and the courage to choose what's real over what's expected. The future would be different from anything they'd imagined, but maybe, just maybe, it would be better than the life they tried to force me into all those years ago. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't about making others suffer, it's about showing them exactly what they lost by being unable to see beyond their own prejudices. And as we ate together, this broken family taking its first steps toward healing, I realized that success truly is the best revenge, not because it proves others wrong, but because it proves you right for believing in yourself when no one else would.